Hey, hello, hi, welcome back to my channel. It's dark. I'm in my not my living room. And today I'm going to be talking about a literary review that I had put together when I was doing my project on how World War II impacted the fashion and textile industry in America. Um, so a literary review is essentially, it's not quite the same as an annotated bibliography, but it's pretty dang close. Basically, it's used to help jog your memory. When you're doing a research project, you're going to be looking at so many sources, and you will not remember what all of those sources had to say. And so you can put essentially like what you think the purpose of the paper or essay or book or whatever was, or you can include little memory joggers for yourself. It's just another tool. So in your I'm sure you do in undergrad too, but my undergrad didn't have essays quite like this. But in your postgraduate studies, they're also used as sort of like a meter, like a marker to send to your professors or whoever, your mentor, to show that when you're actually doing the research and to you kind of actually understood what the things you were reading were, and to like help them get a gauge as to where you're going to go with the essay you're writing, or thesis or whatever. So I'm going to be talking about 6 sources that I had put together. Um, each of them I had written basically a paragraph on each, and I tried to include some sort of memory jogger so I knew to go and look at my notes specific to that particular source when I wanted to pull something specific to support whatever it was I was trying to say. So if you're ready, buckle in. The first source that I want to talk about is Wartime Allocation of Textile and Apparel Resources, Emergency Policy in the 20th Century. It was written by Rachel Maines and was published in the Public Historian in 1985. The article explores 3 primary factors that impacted modern government, or impacts now modern government decision making, which are economics, the military situation, and ideologies. The specific policy that she explores in this essay is that of the, quote, distribution of textiles and apparel to non-combatants, for which the most important policy goal is to keep the civilian population in a healthy and productive condition, end quote. This essay was pretty focused on economic impacts, as well as the application of general history methods into modern policymaking, but it also explores the importance of how textile and fashion can provide a sort of like health meter for a country's economic standing at a given time. The catch is to recognize when the spending of civilians and production of goods is naturally restricted due to wartime conservation efforts, which were, in the case of the Allies in World War II, amplified by German U-boat ambushes of maritime trade. One little interesting thing that I remember reading and subsequently wrote down is the mention of the textile-based black market in the United States, France, and Japan. The next one is called The Impact of World War II on Women's Fashion in the United States and Britain. It was written in 2011 by Megan Manson, and it was her thesis paper that she had submitted and was subsequently published by the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. It was for her master's, I believe, in theatrical costuming, which shares a pretty decent amount of tenets with dress history as a field of study. This thesis paper was so good. It was just so good. If she'll never see this, but if she ever saw this, it was so good. I referenced it heavily. She takes a look at changes in contemporary fashion due to the implementation of rationing, both at the consumer level and at the manufacturing level. She talks about efforts to reallocate materials for the war effort from the civilian textile industry. And one particularly interesting thing that it really caught my, it's still stuck in my head, is how Hollywood was essentially weaponized. It was both obviously to like raise the morale of civilians and the GIs alike, but it was also to project an image of like normalcy and health and virality to international audiences. So while this essay is the work of a student, her sources were so varied and so solid and so sound. I thought that it was a great resource for me. And yeah, I highly encourage that you look it up. I linked it in the video that I was covering this topic in, and I will link it again if you are interested in reading it. The next source is the book Paris Fashion in World War II, Global Diffusion and Nazi Control, wherein Sandra Buckland et al., and et al. Literally just means like other people, quote, examines the world of Paris haute couture in World War II and the international activities of Paris courtiers, end quote. And it acts as like a direct challenge to the popular belief that nothing of note was being developed or produced in, quote, Paris once German forces occupied the city, end quote, in the early 1940s. So as a work of social and dress history, the book focuses pretty heavily on the dissemination of seasonal Parisian haute couture styles to the rest of the world throughout the war. As one of the fashion capitals of the world, Parisian style has almost always had a hand in dictating what is fashion and trendy, at least in regards to a silhouette of any given era, and therefore is a really important subject of study when you're discussing dress or textile history. One thing I found that made this book graduate from being just one useful resource among many to being potentially invaluable was the exploration of Nazi Germany's attitude towards fashion in the Second World War, both in the occupied parts of France and in Germany itself. So you may have noticed up until this point, all of my previous discussed sources have been secondary resources. I was pulling from more modern contemporary historians who were compiling information in more easily digestible books or articles or whatever. I had to go through a lot, but this next one is actually a primary resource published in 1943 by the Pepperell Manufacturing Company of Boston. This book is called People of Peace at War, and it was produced to celebrate and document Pepperell Manufacturing's contribution to the wartime effort. It's basically just a compilation of photographs with like minimal text, but the story that it's telling is that of the garment going through the manufacturing process and then being shipped out and then being utilized on the front lines. And while the photographs are very clearly like idealized versions of their workspace, it did provide a look into what the company wanted to present to the rest of the world, which was that their employees were skilled, dedicated, loyal, and healthy, which again is really similar to the weaponizing of Hollywood that I mentioned earlier. What made it particularly, especially interesting to me is that it provided this really nice firsthand look at some of the more subtle propagandizing that the United States was encouraging and perpetuating at that time to increase morale and to appear as a strong opponent. Because if these people who are working at these mills are strong and happy and healthy and capable and our stuff is so good and clean and strong, then how awesome are our soldiers, right? At least that was the message, you know? My next source is called Rayon Staple Fiber, Its Past and Its Prospects, and it's by Clark Allen, and it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's a discussion of the development and popularity of rayon from when it was first produced in 1914 through the interwar periods into the Second World War. Rates of consumption and price tracking are both discussed at length from around the world to include Japan and Germany and not just the Allied forces. The existence of the cotton industry in conjunction with rayon use provided pretty much all of the necessary textiles during this era, and they were popularized as a blended semi-synthetic option by Germany in World War I. Because rayon can be used to simulate any sort of natural fiber, be it wool, cotton, silk, whatever, it became especially popular as a fabric of choice for both large-scale ready-to-wear manufacturers as well as the by-the-bolt individual purchaser. And this became especially true when wool started to climb in price to astronomical heights during the Second World War. Now, nylon did briefly knock rayon from the throne of the most popular textile, but the reallocation of nylon for wartime materials allowed rayon to regain its throne, at least until the Second World War ended. And then the last source that I want to talk about was Desirable Dress, Rosie's, Sky Girls, and the Politics of Appearance by Eileen Boris. It's a review on the impact of employer and governmental desires on dress and appearance for working class women from the 1940s through the 1960s. Now, the second half of it obviously wasn't quite as useful for me for what I was trying to put together, but the first half was invaluable. It provided some really interesting and useful insight into some of the phenomena like Rosie the Riveter and the introduction of and acceptance of women wearing slacks in the workplace. They talk about some of the industrial hazards of femininity in the workplace, or at least femininity performance, which included talking about harassment, you know? Um, a distracted male workforce could theoretically be made more careless by the sight of legs, which was an actual thing that was written for why women couldn't or shouldn't be allowed to wear slacks in the 1930s. Fun little fact for you. But they also talk about some of like the actual legitimate physical hazards, such as the flammability of makeup, which like, yikes. One of the little stories that was in there that I found kind of funny and also kind of sad was the case of the woman in red pants, which was an incident, a real incident, where a woman in red slacks had her pay docked because her pants made her sexually distracting. Ew. Anyway, her coworkers rallied around her and actually had a picket line effort. So, you know, get them, girls. The thing that I found particularly useful about this particular source is that it provided an alternative view into the subtext of fashion in the era, both from the women's view and from the view of the men that they were working alongside. So yeah, those are 6 of the sources that I was using when I was putting together that project. If you liked this video, please consider leaving a like. If you like this kind of video in general, please consider subscribing. I've been putting these out once every 3 weeks has been my goal, on Saturday at noon Central Time in the United States. I thought I was going to end with something quippy, but I honestly can't think of anything right now, so instead I'm just going to say bye, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye! Rates of consumption and